Well, welcome everybody. We are really excited to have you here with us today. My name is Erin Cameron, and I'm the Development and Outreach Coordinator for SACE. I will be the facilitator for today's webinar, Water Smart Power, Strengthening the U.S. Electricity System in a Warming World. On behalf of SACE, I'd like to thank you all for attending today's webinar. It is your interest and support that make our work possible. For those of you not familiar with SACE, we are a regional organization focused on promoting responsible energy choices that create global warming solutions and ensure clean, safe, and healthy communities throughout the Southeast. SACE has been a leading voice for energy policy to protect the quality of life and treasure places in the Southeast since 1985. We are a membership organization, and we have some SACE members here on our call today, and I just wanted to thank you so much for your support and encourage those of you who are not members to join us today. We will be recording this webinar, so all of our lines have been muted to assure recording quality. I encourage you to type in your questions using the questions option on your control panel, and we will then answer the questions in the order they are received at the very end of the presentation. This presentation will also be available on our website, cleanenergy.org. And now I'd like to turn it over to Sarah Barzak, our SACE High Risk Energy Choices Program Director.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you all so much for joining us today. I am Sarah Barzak, the High Risk Energy Choices Program Director with Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. And I'm very pleased to present today's speakers. We're going to begin with John Rogers, who is the Senior Energy Analyst in the Climate and Energy Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. He is also the co-manager of the Energy and Water in a Warming World initiative. Today he will discuss the new report released earlier this month, in which he is also a co-author. It's called Water Smart Power, Strengthening the U.S. Electricity System in a Warming World. John will be followed by Chris Manganello, Policy Director from Georgia River Network, and Cindy Lowry, the Executive Director of Alabama Rivers Alliance. Southern Alliance for Clean Energy has been partnering with the Union of Concerned Scientists and our local partners on the release of this report and surrounding activities, such as the state tours held in Georgia and Alabama last week. I think some of you we met while we were on the road. And we are excited about the opportunities this collaboration has opened up for us to all talk about the critical nexus between water, energy, and climate issues here in the Southeast. Let me start by providing a quick summary of our speakers' backgrounds. John Rogers joined the Union of Concerned Scientists in 2006 and has worked on energy issues for more than 20 years. He holds a bachelor's degree from Princeton University and a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Michigan. Chris Manganello is the policy director for Georgia River Network based in Athens, Georgia. And Chris has degrees from Eckerd College and the University of Georgia and is currently writing a book about water, energy, and politics in the Southeast. Cindy Lowry, as I said earlier, is the executive director of Alabama Rivers Alliance based in Birmingham, Alabama. She attended Auburn University and has a Master's of Public Administration from the University of Alabama in Birmingham. Please note that we'd like to get through all the presentations before taking questions, and hopefully we will have a good chunk of time to go over all your questions. Now I'll turn it over to John Rogers with the Union of Concerned Scientists. John?
Great. Thanks very much, Sarah and Erin, and thanks to SACE for hosting this, and to Chris and Cindy for the valuable partnerships we've had with you all in terms of shaping this report and the research that underlies it. So I work for the Union of Concerned Scientists, as Sarah said, and it's a non-governmental organization that puts rigorous, independent science like this work to work to solve our planet's most pressing problems, including in the areas of climate and energy. But this is very much a collaborative effort. So this is not a UCS report. This is a product of the UCS organized Energy and Water in a Warming World initiative. You can see the names of some of the collaborators, the researchers and the advisors for this report in particular. And there are lots of other people whose names don't show up here. People in organizations like Cindy and Chris and their organizations and SACE. What we wanted to do with this report was build on something that we came out with in late 2011 that looked at power plant water use. So EW3 in general, Energy and Water in a Warming World, is aimed at raising awareness of the connection between energy and water and the collision between energy and water. So the water implications of our electricity choices particularly in the context of a warming world. This 2011 report was aimed at looking at where we are now, and it was really the foundation, a prologue for one we wanted to come out with and did earlier this month, that looked at where we're headed and thought about the different pathways we could follow in the electricity system, and so how we might get and use electricity, and what that might mean from a water perspective, and again, in the context of a changing climate. So when we look at that, when we want to look at this, we have to understand the background for this, and part of that background is what's going on with water supply and demand in general. So how imbalanced or imbalanced they are in different parts of the country, and different parts of the country have a different relationship with their water resources. And it also depends on what's going on at a particular time with regard to water resources because of drought. If I were to show a drought map right now in the southeast, it'd be pretty clear that there's very little going on in the way of drought. No drought to be seen anywhere. But if you were to look last summer, in August, so not even going back to the severe drought of August of 2007 and 2008 in the southeast, just back to last summer, this is what you see: 60% of the country in drought, including parts of the southeast. And we know that droughts, particularly when we get to the level of the 2007 drought, that has real consequences for how well, for interstate relations, among other things. Just how do Alabama and Georgia and Florida or Tennessee or the Carolinas, how do they manage their water resources with respect to their own needs and the needs of their neighbors? So that's part of the backdrop. And what we know is that when we've got situations, sort of the standard water supply and demand pressures, and then you overlay something like this, you get what we call energy-water collisions. And this is a subset of them. These are the ones related to heat and drought. These are power plants that have gotten into trouble because of their water dependence. And you see them, you can see them in places you might not expect it. You see them in the southeast. You see them in the Midwest. The Northeast, we haven't even updated this map to reflect the fact that earlier this month there was a nuclear plant in Massachusetts that got in trouble because of its water resources. So that's an odd thing to have happen. And it should give us pause, and it's an important part of the backdrop. But the other thing about where we are now with electricity and water, with the electricity system, is understanding the rapid transformation that's going on right now because of the low price of natural gas. So we see natural gas and renewable energy generation growing. We see coal generation coming down. We also see a whole lot of coal plants that are being retired, tens of thousands of megawatts of coal plants. And that has implications. That has implications for our carbon profile. It has implications for economics. It also has implications for water. So as we go forward then, and we think about, how do we understand what our possible futures might look like? So I'll talk a little bit, just really briefly, about our approach, and then show you some, just a taste of our findings, both at the national level and then at a much more regional or local level, and then a little bit about what we think this means and what we might do about it. So as you think about the future, there are clearly all kinds of options for meeting our electricity needs going forward. They do have implications by a variety, through a variety of lenses. Clearly, we want a power system that is as inexpensive as can be, but not irresponsibly so. So we want it to be clean, and there are various ways of thinking about what clean means. Certainly, climate change is one dimension of that, carbon pollution, but also reliability, and thinking about, okay, what's going to cause problems, and how can we avoid those? So first, let's try to understand the magnitude of them. So we started with our an electricity model from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that we could look at different pathways. So this is what business as usual might look like, what we would project it would look like given current trends and policies. And what you see is that it's heavily reliant on natural gas, and that has both pluses and minuses. A big negative is if you look from a carbon perspective. Now, the power sector is a major contributor to carbon emissions in the U.S. It's also one where it's the sector that has perhaps the best opportunities for cutting its contribution to climate change. And so to see it not going up carbon emissions not going up is a good thing, but to see them only flattening out just doesn't cut it, given what we know about climate change and the power sector. So that's the first red flag. But let's look from the water perspective. So if you look at the business as usual water use, you look at both withdrawals, how much is taken out of lakes and rivers or aquifers, and consumption, how much doesn't get put back, how much gets evaporated in the process. And the first thing you see is that this is good, right? The trends are downward. This looks very positive, but, and there are a lot of buts here. So one of them is that if you look at when those transitions happen, you look at consumption, you can see that it stays flat until after 2030, and the drop in withdrawals mostly happens after 2030. So that's one thing, the timing. Another is that these are national results and may or may not reflect what would happen at the regional or the local level based on certain pathways. These are also just about water quantity. This tells you nothing about water temperature and other impacts, water quality impacts. It's also just about power plant cooling. And there are a whole lot of water impacts upstream and down. You know, if you think about a heavy reliance on natural gas, there's hydraulic fracturing. That's where all this natural gas, much of this new natural gas is coming from. That has both water quantity and water quality implications, particularly at the local level. So in the region of the extraction of the natural gas. It's also true that a lot of that other projections by national laboratories, say, about power plant water use don't show these same encouraging trends. As we were aggressive in our assumptions or optimistic in our assumptions about what types of plants would get retired and what that would mean. So, for example, plants that withdraw much more water, these so-called once-through cooled plants, we assumed that they would be retired before others in their area if we no longer needed that capacity. So that's an optimistic assumption, and certainly reality may not follow that. And of course, there's the carbon piece, and carbon has climate change implications, and climate change has water implications. So understanding that connection between climate change and water availability and water quality should give us pause, even with regard to water results. So what can we do about that, though? So the first question is, can we do better? You know, choices only matter if they actually make a difference. And so what we wanted to do with our modeling was look at other scenarios and see what would happen under those pathways. So the first thing we do is we say, okay, we know that the carbon is a non-starter, that this level of carbon emissions is a non-starter. So what if we put in place the budget that's been derived by in terms of the U.S. government, the National Research Council, extensive modeling by a range of players, and looked at the electricity sector's contribution to cutting carbon emissions 80% by the middle of the century. So that's sort of what we need to get to, the kind of path we need to be on. So then we could look at a variety of ways of meeting that carbon budget. So we could prioritize renewable energy or energy efficiency. We could look at technologies such as nuclear energy or carbon capture and storage. So these are different ways, and we can put those together in different combinations. I'm going to focus on one that we looked at that had heavy reliance on heavy ramp up of renewable energy and strong deployment of energy efficiency, and show you what that means instead of business as usual, what we might end up with. So again, you see energy efficiency addressing meeting all of our future electricity demand and then some, and you see renewable energy meeting most of the rest. Now that 80% penetration is what was modeled by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in a report they came out with last year that just says, is this doable? What would it mean? That sort of thing. So we know that's doable from that report. So we want to take that and then look at the water implications. So let's see what those look like. Instead of the water implications of business as usual, we look at withdrawals and we look at consumption. And what we see is much deeper reductions, so 97% cuts in water withdrawals in the case of water withdrawals, and 85% cuts in the case of water consumption. We also see that it's much faster, such that by the time you get to, say, 2025 or 2030, by 2025, you're actually at only half the water withdrawals and half the water consumption under this pathway versus where we are now or where we would be under business as usual. So that's a pretty important distinction, potentially pretty important distinction, if you think about when that next drought is going to hit. If we could guarantee that the next drought in the Southeast wouldn't be till after 2030, we might do things a little differently. But if we think that it might be in the next 10, 15, 20 years, then it might make that blue pathway, the renewable energy and efficiency pathway, seem a whole lot more attractive. So, but the water use, water quantity is only one metric of is one way of evaluating different pathways. We also looked at the economics. So if you look at electricity prices, we would project that they would go up under any scenario. Not surprisingly, prices do that, and they might go up more under some of these other pathways for a variety of reasons. But ultimately, customers don't pay prices. They don't pay electricity rates. What they pay are bills. So if you take that price per unit of electricity and you multiply that by how much electricity you use, what you see is electricity bills under the business as usual scenario would go up as demand increased. Whereas under one where we prioritize, particularly energy efficiency, what we could see is bills that are much lower. Now there are caveats to this that would drive these lines up or down. So those are included in our report. But the basic principle is the same. That basically what we're seeing is that electricity bills could be much lower under a pathway that's heavy on renewable energy and energy efficiency. But if we come back to this issue of the energy-water collisions, we know that those happen in particular places, particular rivers, particular stretches of rivers or lakes. We know that water is a local thing. So what was innovative about the research that we organized was that we paired that electricity modeling with water modeling. And we also picked an electricity model that allowed us to get down to the level that was water relevant. So first, if we look at regional water results, what we can see, and I'll just blow up the Southeast here for a moment, is that again, might or might not mirror what's going on at the national level. So different choices at a national level would manifest themselves different ways at the regional level. That is, depending on technologies, depending on resources, depending on economics. So you would see, for example, in the Southeast, you might see that water consumption on the right there might actually go up between 2010 and 2030. Based on business as usual choices. So that's an important dimension to understand. But what we really want to do is get down to a much more local level. And I'll show you just a couple ways we did that with this pairing of the electricity modeling and the water modeling. So we zeroed in on particular basins in the U.S. Southwest and the Southeast. In the Southeast, it's the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint on the right there, and the Alabama Coosa Tallapoosa. So two sets of rivers with great importance in terms of metropolitan Atlanta, in terms of Georgia and Alabama and Florida and their relationships, in terms of economics. If you think about the Apalachicola Bay down at the bottom there and how important it is for it to get enough fresh water to allow the local fishing industry, shellfish industry to thrive. And of course, the power plant pieces of this. So we looked at river temperatures was one way we studied local impacts in the Southeast. So if you think about the economics of landlocked rivers where you see striped bass, say stripers, which are important for anglers, but also happen to be very temperature sensitive. So we looked at one particular spot on the Coosa River. So it's downstream from some coal plants, from some power plants, and it's upstream from the Georgia-Alabama border and Weiss Lake. So an important part. And what we wanted to know was what happens to river temperatures. In particular, we'll look at how often are we going to be above 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So 90 degrees Fahrenheit is the level that many states have for discharge. That's the maximum at which you're allowed to discharge water because of ecological sensitivities. And again, it's not just about the ecology, it's about the economics of the people who depend on there being a thriving ecosystem in that river, for fishing, for tourism, et cetera. So if we look at how often we get above 90 degrees, you can look at under business as usual. What you see is what we've done is introduce we want to look not just at temperatures or water impacts during normal circumstances. We really want to look when push comes to shove, so when we've got a drought. So what we've included here is a drier set of years from recent history. We've cobbled them together and said, let's imagine that that's what we have over the next 40 years. And also if temperatures continue to warm, as we believe they will. So what does that look like? Well, what you see is essentially staying flat until you get to toward the end of the analysis period, and then you could see the number of days over 90 degrees Fahrenheit actually tripling. So that's important to understand. But again, this only matters if we have choices that will affect that. So if we look at the renewable energy and efficiency scenario, what we can see is that effect going away. So not only are we not stuck where we are now, not only are we not increasing, we're also not stuck where we are now. We could actually see that effect going away. And we could see temperatures that are 3 to 13 degrees cooler even as early as the 2030s. And this has to do with the choice of power plants, what gets retired, what gets built, and in this case, a lot of electricity not being used because we meet that demand with energy efficiency, and power plants getting replaced with low or no water renewable energy. So that's one metric. Another way we looked at was river flow. So we pick a stretch of the Chattahoochee, say, on the Georgia side. But again, this is a river that's really important and flows down the border between Georgia and Alabama. And what we found was that as early as 2025, you could have river flows that were 5 to 10% higher in summer and fall than under business as usual if you went the renewable energy and efficiency pathway. And again, that has to do with what happens to power plants upstream, what our choices, our overall choices mean for what gets built, how we meet how we meet our electricity needs. So those are just a sample of the findings in the report, and we talk about reservoir storage in the Southwest or groundwater drawdowns. And so those are all important metrics. But then the next question is, how do we get there? What do we do to build the water-smart electricity sector? And our first point is that we need to understand what we mean by water-smart. So given that connection between climate change and the water resources of the future, certainly addressing carbon is a piece of that. And clearly there are direct water implications, both on the quantity and the quality side. And we need to think about that. We need to think not just about water supply and demand now, but think about where we're going to be 20, 30, 40 years down the road. We're making investments. If we're building a power plant, we're expecting it to last for decades. And we want to be thinking about not just does that power plant have enough water now, but will it have enough water 30 years down the road? And not just will it have enough water, but will there be enough water, understanding that municipal demand might be increasing and agricultural demand might be doing its thing. So what's going on with that water supply and demand picture? What is it going to look like 30 or 40 years from now? But we also need to understand that being water smart doesn't mean picking a solution and then using it as a cookie cutter approach to everywhere in the U.S. Birmingham is not Atlanta, is not Phoenix or Chicago or Boston. Different parts of the country, different states have different resources, have different needs, and so you want to figure out what's most appropriate, which technologies are most appropriate. And you also do want to think about the economics. Keep that in mind, not just the capital costs, but the ongoing costs, and also the costs of issues like water dependence. So if a power plant gets into trouble, we've seen where a power company has had to go out and buy, spend tens of millions of dollars buying makeup power because their power plant, a principal power plant, was not able to meet the need. So those are important pieces to understand about what we mean by water smart. But then there's the question of who's making decisions and how are those decisions different. We talk a little bit about that in the report, and I'll just go quickly through some of the actors that we see as being involved in this. It's clearly about the power companies and the plant developers. They need to be making choices that will serve not just their needs, but their community needs, and not just their current community's needs, but the community of decades from now, and figuring out if their power plant choices, if they're making power plant choices that fit within that understanding of the future. It's also about the regulators and the lawmakers who are creating the framework and saying, carbon is important, and we care about water. We want balanced use of our water, and all these other issues, and basically letting defining the boundaries for power plant choices. It's also about investing in technology. So at this point, you pick a technology like carbon capture and storage or nuclear energy, and those are both relatively water intensive. So carbon capture and storage, for example, you would consume 45 to 90% more water per unit of electricity just because of the way the technology is. But is that inherent in the technology, or can we do something? Can we invest in improving the viability of those options for the future? And there are a range of other stakeholders. If you think about the consumers who are going to be affected by these decisions, and who are also competitors in a lot of cases for those water, or they want that water for other uses. Think about the people who are going to be investing in this, or the people who are ensuring either the power plant operations or the businesses that depend on those power plants. So there are a range of actors who could be making choices differently if they were to take into account this full range of issues. And that's really what it comes down to when we're talking about decision making, is an integrated approach. Thinking not just, if you're an electricity sector decision maker, and thinking not just about the power sector, but thinking about the water dimensions of this and how that fits within the overall water panorama, and also clearly the climate dimensions of that. So the important thing to understand is that we have choices, and we showed that in our 2011 report. We showed the implications of our past choices. What we want people to understand now is that we're making choices about what we retire, which plants we retire, which ones we retrofit, what new technologies we build, new plants we bring online, how we make and use electricity, how much priority we give to electricity, energy efficiency. So we are building the power sector of the future. And we're hardwiring risk or resilience that's going to persist for decades. And it's pretty clear that for electricity, for water, for other users of that water, for the climate, we've got to get this right. And it's equally clear that we can get it right, that we've got choices, that we've got the technologies, and that we can get to the broad enough understanding to make that possible. So I will leave it there. I'll just say the report itself is available via that first link. The second link has the manuscripts. A lot of this research has gone through the peer review process and is now public. Other pieces are about to be public. So you can go to that second link to find some of the papers that underpin this research. So thank you very much, and I'll look forward to the Q&A.
Thanks, John. This is Chris Manganello. I'm the Policy Director at Georgia River Network. Georgia River Network is a statewide organization working to engage and empower citizens to advocate for clean water and to enjoy Georgia's 14 diverse river basins. I also want to give a quick thanks to the folks at SACE and the EW3 initiative. Georgia River Network has enjoyed working with them and bringing this important research to our own partners here in Georgia. So I just want to talk a little bit about, why does water smart power matter for me and my organization, and why I think it matters for the folks here in Georgia. Water and energy are clearly connected in Georgia, and the decisions we make today matter for the future. Decision makers have to think, and really should think, reasonably and coherently about future energy generation and how to allocate limited water supplies for multiple sectors, because unfortunately they haven't always gotten the decision-making process right in the past. So, when we think about drought effects on power plants in Georgia, we can see those over the past decade. On the Chattahoochee and Plant Farley, on the Altamaha, Plant Hatch, and as John was talking about in the report, in particular on the Coosa River, primarily below Plant Hammond, where there's a chronic problem with thermal discharges. And this, of course, brings the question of, will we see more collisions? And it's entirely likely that we will, and here's why. Georgia Power and the Southern Company have a large energy and water footprint in the southeast. In Georgia, for example, Georgia Power and its Southern Company cousins withdraw water and generate electricity at 15 fossil fuel plants and nuclear facilities, as well as 19 hydroelectric dams. Distributed all over the state's river basins, these generating units rely on water from 8 of Georgia's 14 major river basins. And again, close to 50% of Georgia's total water use is for electric generation. So again, given this broad energy and water footprint, we have plenty of examples of energy and water collisions in the past. So again, this report matters because Georgia's economic, water, and climate future are riding on the energy choices we make today. And just, I'm going to talk real briefly here about a missed decision point in Georgia water planning process, perhaps. We had a situation, the Georgia Regional Water Planning began in 2004 and wrapped up in 2011. And a variety of the regional water councils worked for about 3 years collecting and interpreting data. However, the information on water use by existing thermoelectric power plants, which is, again, the largest single water user in Georgia, was delayed by the utilities until about 3 months before the regional water plan drafts were due. And furthermore, in that planning process, not all of the proposed plants were included. So hopefully as the water plan gets revised in the next few years, we anticipate and hope that utility data will come earlier in that planning process. As far as a water smart step forward, certainly just a few weeks ago, the Georgia Power and the Public Service Commission had an opportunity to make a choice to invest in renewable energy and retire coal-burning units. Thankfully, the PSC and Georgia Power decided to follow, at least take a step down a water smart path that will help reduce carbon emissions and could reduce some pressure on already contested water supplies. Georgia Power's next 20-year integrated resource plan will add 525 megawatts of new solar generation, and the company will retire 15 dirty coal and oil-burning units. So while this is all good news, we also have to remember that Georgia Power continues to operate major coal-burning facilities and is adding 2 nuclear reactors at Plant Vogtle. So this is kind of a question of this business-as-usual approach and how this coal and nuclear approach will continue to stress water resources in Georgia. And then, of course, this business-as-usual approach will face more risk in a warming world. So just to summarize, this report matters because energy and water continue to collide in Georgia. Decision makers have missed opportunities to make clean energy choices to avoid those collisions. And we must continue to make bold water smart steps because climate change will further compromise our energy and water systems if we don't. So that's what I have to say here on these energy and water collisions, past, present, future. And Cindy, I'm going to go ahead and pass the digital mic to you.
Cindy, are you on with us?
Okay, I did the mistake of not unmuting myself, so I was talking. I apologize. Thank you all very much. Thank you all very much for letting me be a part of this report and this effort. I will echo a lot of the comments that Chris made, but from an Alabama perspective. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the Alabama Rivers Alliance and why it's important for us to be at this table and involved in this effort. We are also a statewide organization. We're working in Alabama to protect our vast water resources, and we work on water quality and quantity issues. And in the past several years, we really focused a lot on our water quantity and protection and sustainability of our water supplies in Alabama. And as you can see from this slide, Alabama is a very water-rich state, and we have more navigable stream miles than any other state. A lot of freshwater resources flow across our borders, and we have a lot of plant and animal diversity, particularly within our freshwater species. So it's really important that we protect these resources for not only for our economy and our citizens, but also for aquatic habitat and environmental reasons. So this report was particularly interesting to me, and if we can, one might ask why Alabama, if you have this many water resources and such an abundant water supplies, then why would you be interested in sort of focusing in on water quantity issues and the collisions of water and power? So if we could go to the next slide, please. Even though we have so many water resources, it doesn't mean that we don't have threats to these water, to our water quantity. And one of the most probably well-known threats to Alabama's water resources at this point, or at least perceived threats, are our neighboring states. We've been in conflict with Georgia and Florida over shared water basins. And as you can see from this picture, this map of our state with divided into our river basins, almost all of our major river basins are shared with other states, with the exception of two, the Black Warrior and the Cahaba. We share with other states, and oftentimes we're downstream from those other states. So it's very important that we learn to manage our own resources and understand our own resources, as well as work with our neighbors and how we're going to manage these resources in the future. We also have had some pretty significant droughts in the recent years. As John mentioned, the drought of 2007 and 2008 was pretty much a wake-up call to our state to say, you know, even though we have vast resources, our economies and our systems are created for that amount of water, and when we find that in shortage, we don't always have the best systems in place to know what to do with those. And this year we're not in a drought, but there's nothing to think that that threat is not coming back. Probably most of the science shows it will be coming back more often in the future. We also have increasing demand for water supplies, and which I'll talk about more in just a moment. And we have a lack of management and planning within our own state. We don't have Chris mentioned the Georgia water plan, and we don't have a water plan in our state, and I'm also going to talk about that in just a moment. But one of the most important reasons that this report really spoke to me and was really important that we get this out in Alabama, if we'll move to the next slide. If you look at our water withdrawals in Alabama from 2005 USGS data, you will see that 86% of our water withdrawals were for cooling power plants. So unlike, John mentioned that water is local, and that's why it was so important for this modeling to not only be from the energy modeling, but also the water modeling. And if you look at these statistics from our state, most of the time you think irrigation for farming is the highest use of withdrawal of water in a state, but for Alabama it's actually for cooling power plants by far. We don't irrigate very much in this state. Now this is not consumptive use, and there is a difference between consumption and withdrawal, but the water really has to be there for withdrawal, even if it's being put back in downstream. It does still have to be available for that withdrawal to make that plant work. So, and we are getting increased, the farmers are hoping to irrigate more in the future. They're recognizing with unpredictable weather patterns that irrigation will bring in a much more economic growth for the farmers. So there's that increased demand, and of course public supply and industrial and other uses that will continue to compete with our electricity. So this is a very important aspect of our water withdrawals in Alabama, and that makes this issue even more important. And lastly, if we'll move to the next slide, we have some really important decision points that we're facing in Alabama and in the region that are put us in a position where we can make good decisions based on, if we have good information, which this report helps provide, that we can make decisions that are going to solidify what happens in many of these water basins for decades to come. And I just wanted to list these opportunities, and as you see on the slide, I say now or never, and hopefully it's not never, but it is a really important time, because these decisions, each of these decisions could last for generations, and we want to make sure that we're considering this important information from this report, as well as all the other information we have available to us to make these decisions. So on the Coosa River Basin, which John mentioned as part of the ACT, they are undergoing hydropower relicensing on the 7 hydropower dams on the Coosa, and these dams are operated by Alabama Power. And this process has been going on for over a decade now, but they just issued the final draft, or the final license, and this license has been challenged on both sides by our organization and some other environmental organizations, as well as by the power company on the other side. So there's a struggle to decide how this basin is going to be operated with regards to the hydropower dams and river flows. And I think the information on in the report about the thermal pollution on the Coosa and the chances for higher temperatures should all be taken into consideration when we're finalizing this hydropower license. Additionally, the Corps of Engineers is finalizing their manuals for the ACT and the ACF basins, and these are how the Corps is going to operate their parts of the river that they have jurisdiction over, which also have major impacts on the flows of the river systems. And inside our state, Governor Bentley, our current governor, issued an initiative last year to our state agencies to develop a statewide water management plan. As I mentioned, we don't have a water policy that regulates or governs how we're going to manage our water resources for the future from a quantity standpoint. And this is an initiative that we are behind on. As Chris mentioned, Georgia's already gone through this process. But what we can do is hopefully learn from Georgia's mistakes or missed opportunities, and also learn from what other states, Georgia and others, have done correctly on this, and create a water management plan that will take into consideration the impacts on our electricity, on our water quality, and all of these issues. And this initiative is due to the governor by, the recommendations from our state agencies are due to the governor by December of this year. And lastly, the Public Service Commission, sort of on the energy side of things, has recently opened up informal rate reviews for the power companies and the gas companies in our state. And this has really opened up an entire conversation about our energy choices, where our energy is coming from, and what kind of impacts it's having, which is very applicable to this report and this conversation. So these are all really interesting policy and regulatory decisions that are happening in Alabama that make this report particularly timely. So I want to thank you for allowing me to share the Alabama perspective, and I'll turn it back over.
Thanks, Cindy. We now do have some time for some Q&A here, and we don't have any questions yet. So I suggest we kind of hang out for a minute. If you guys want to type in your questions, we will answer them in the order that we receive them. Okay, we do have a question here from Gary Morgan. Thanks, Gary. In the TVA area in the southeast, we have tremendous river and stream assets. TVA refuses to discuss small run-of-the-river projects. There was no mention of the small hydropower projects in the presentation as a solution. Why are we not seeing run-of-the-river 25 milliwatt small hydropower plants along our rivers in the southeastern U.S., particularly in the TVA area with an interconnected smart grid system?
Yeah, Aaron, I can.
Who would like to answer?
Great,
John, thanks.
Thanks for that question, Gary. Yeah, I should have mentioned, so hydro was not something we analyzed either in the first report or this one, in part because for hydro in general, it's tough to think about how much water is being used. So clearly there's evaporation. If you've got a large impoundment, a large lake serving a hydro dam, you've got lots of evaporation, potentially lots of evaporation. It's not clear that all that should be attributed to the hydro facility. That is, that lake is serving multiple purposes. It may be for flood control, it may be for water supply, it's certainly for recreation later in its life. So, thinking about that. So hydro actually, it doesn't get a buy, but we don't include it in our figures of overall water use, either withdrawals or consumption. And we also don't, in the modeling, one challenge that we point out in doing this type of modeling, we point this out in the report, is that it's, thinking about hydro, clearly there's this interaction. If in the water model you're assuming that climate change, you're modeling climate change in there, you'd like that to be reflected, to go back, to be able to go back and be reflected in the electricity choices in terms of the contribution that hydro is making. For purposes of this analysis, we didn't have that ability. We certainly look at small hydro in other modeling we do, and very much believe in incremental hydro in particular. So looking at improvements in the efficiency of existing dams, or adding hydroelectric facilities to dams that already exist and aren't going away because of the other other roles they fill. But certainly lower impact hydro, such as you're discussing, can be an important piece of the overall electricity mix. Chris, I don't know. I know you've looked some at the issues of hydro in the southeast. I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I mean, small hydro, of course, is a possibility. It's not anything we've actually seen here in Georgia. Of course, small hydro, as I think John was also talking about, is there's a high risk of drought in the region. So the question is whether or not small hydro is the right direction to be moving in. And also the other trick with small hydro is that at the same time that we're seeing a movement where actually low-head dams and run-of-river dams have actually been removed in many river systems. These small hydro projects also, I mean, the whole reason for removing some of these smaller dams has been to kind of reestablish connectivity from an ecological perspective. So I think that those, small hydro is a possibility, but it faces the risk of drought, which is, again, kind of historical. We can see that over time, that drought has complicated hydro production all over the region. So that's what I see as kind of one of the key risks of those potential facilities.
And this is Cindy. I'll just add that there has been some effort to increase capacity on existing hydro dams. I'm not sure about in the TBA area, but and on the behalf of the power company here in Alabama, and on some core dams, there are some proposals to put small hydro on existing core dams. But I agree with Chris and John that there's complications there. If you're talking about building any new, even low-head dams or run-of-the-river dams, there's still some ecological issues that would make that less attractive.
Great, thank you guys. We have another question here from Angela. On the slides that represented energy efficiency and renewable increases rather than business as usual, coal totally disappears by 2030. Was that based on coal becoming uneconomic by then, based on fuel costs and upcoming environmental regulations?
Yeah, so Angela, if you're asking about the slide for the renewable energy and efficiency case, so we didn't say coal has to go away, and we didn't assume that there were any new policies for coal. We used the same cost projections that we had used in other scenarios. But what we did say was that energy efficiency was going to come on more strongly, and renewable energy would come on more strongly. Our research was policy neutral. That is, we're not assuming a particular policy. For example, the carbon. If you look at the carbon budget, we don't say. We're not looking at whether it's a cap and trade or a carbon tax or just people getting smart on carbon. So it just clearly some of these things are going to take some policy advances to actually make them happen. But in our projections, it's not us assuming anything about coal other than it's letting the economics do its work. And yeah, coal plants, nuclear plants in particular, you see, do not fare well. I mean, just if we give the model a choice under any of the scenarios, unless we say build more nuclear, then it chooses not to build more nuclear just based on the economics.
Thank you, John. We have another question here from Brian. Has Alabama Rivers looked at the thermal and other aquatic impacts of the Browns Ferry 3 reactor nuclear plant?
We have not been involved in looking at in that particular plant, looking at thermal pollution. There is a river keeper on the Tennessee River, a fairly new organization that is much more involved now in looking at the water quality aspects of the plants on the Tennessee River in Alabama, and they're looking into that. But we haven't historically gathered that data.
And that is a case, you may have seen Browns Ferry on our map. This is John, on our map of energy-water collisions. That's the case of a plant that has gotten into trouble 3 of the last 6 summers because of the high river temperatures on the Tennessee, and that's also a case of where they've invested in cooling towers to try to deal with that situation that during the summer peak. And that's certainly a potential solution in some of these cases. In other cases, if you make that kind of investment, and we've seen this in other parts of the country, you make that kind of investment and then you find out that the economics just don't work. So if you've invested in $750 million in building cooling towers for your coal plant, and the economics of coal have shifted, then you've just wasted $750 million of somebody's money. So you really want to think long and hard about the range, and part of what we're trying to do with this research and the report is help people understand the range of options that are available to us other than just building a cooling tower. But again, that might be the way to approach it in some cases.
Well, and this is Sarah with Southern Alliance for Clean Energy. I think, and Brian knows this very well, he's in Tennessee and tracks TVA pretty closely, but the Tennessee River is certainly an example of a highly manipulated river system that has a slew of power plants and other industrial facilities. And when you look at using TVA as an example of a utility, upstream from Browns Ferry, which is a 3-reactor facility, they have potential plans to do other new power plants that are very water intensive, such as the Watts Bar 2 reactor, in Tennessee, potentially multiple reactor units at the Bellefonte site, which is in Alabama. So, looking at the bigger picture and the long-term impacts of the Tennessee River, and then coupled with, climate change modeling, this report is, I feel, instrumental in showing that more investment in some of these water-intensive energy supply options likely does not bode well for both the water supply and the water quality of rivers such as the Tennessee.
Thanks, guys. Do we have any additional questions?
I actually, this is John. I actually have one for Chris,
yes,
if I may, following up on Cindy's comment about agriculture and the competition, her graph about the competition from agriculture or the competition for agriculture from power plants. I was wondering if Chris could talk a little bit about what's going on and I guess thinking about Southwest Georgia in terms of the ag sector and how that figures in.
Sure. Certainly the agriculture in the Flint River Basin, which is one of the 3 rivers that comprise the Apalachicola, Chattahoochee, Flint, ACF river basins. Agriculture in Southwest Georgia, along the Flint in particular, is an incredibly big business in the state, and the irrigated agriculture, groundwater pumping, as well as surface water withdrawals for center pivot irrigation in Georgia is highly capitalized and also highly profitable. And the Flint River is in many ways also made to provide an additional supply of water at the Florida-Georgia line, in some ways to make up for flow that is not coming down the Chattahoochee from Lake Lanier. So in the ACF basin in particular, we see not just the kind of energy and water collision, but we also see this kind of agricultural food collision as well that creeps in with that I think fits in this larger question of all these different sectors that are dependent upon water supplies from one shared river basin. And of course, center pivot irrigation it actually has its own energy collision as well, because most of the center pivots are electric. So you kind of have this groundwater pumping. You got to pump water out of the ground using electricity. Farmers have increasingly moved away from gasoline motors to electric motors over the last few decades. So you kind of see this direct connection between electricity for pumping, as well as this kind of collision up and down the watershed in the context of energy.
And thanks, Chris. And we're pretty clear when we talk about these issues that there's stuff that could happen in the agricultural sector or in the municipal. You know, you think about farmers, how farmers use water. You think about how cities use water. There are things that each of those, so other water users could do to save water, to make themselves more efficient, to prepare them much more for a new drought, the next drought that comes along. Our point with this report and the research underlying it is that we're also making decisions in the power sector. And we can be making decisions in the power sector that make things worse from a water perspective, or we can be making decisions that make things better. So that's the climate, you know, the carbon emission piece of this, but that's also the direct water use and water quality implications of our power sector choices. So yes, there are things that can and probably should happen elsewhere, but just looking at our piece of the pie, think about energy sector decision makers. Are we doing what we can and should be doing to avoid or to reduce the chance of energy-water collisions in the future?
We had one additional question come in. This one is from Angela. On the Georgia slide, what was the issue with Plant Hammond?
Let's see, Plant Hammond. Plant Hammond, that's primarily the thermal discharge problem that John highlighted in the report itself, where the water from the plant at the once-through cooling facility, the water can exceed 90 degrees, and the kind of the clear water collision is that during the drought of 2007, Georgia Power installed portable cooling units to help mitigate those thermal discharges, to help bring the water that was going back into the Coosa River below, to keep the water below the 90-degree threshold.
And portable cooling towers.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, and portable cooling towers like that certainly do deal with, can help deal with the temperature issues, but then of course the way you're cooling down the water is by evaporating more of it, so you're potentially exacerbating, or you are exacerbating the overall water picture through those choices.
Certainly, and from our perspective and folks who work up in the Coosa Basin, Coosa Riverkeeper in Georgia, the long-term solution, obviously, one would be potentially to close Plant Hammond down, or to reduce the number of units operating there, and the other would be to install permanent cooling towers for the long haul.
Okay, great, guys. Those are all of our questions. It looks like we're going to wrap up right at the hour. And I just want to thank everyone, John, Chris, Cindy, and Sarah, and everyone for attending today and for your thoughtful questions. We are very excited about our monthly webinar series. It's a great way for us to connect with you, our members and supporters, on the critical issues we all care so much about. The presentation and the recording of today's webinar will be posted on our website, and you'll receive an email in a few days with the link to that archived webinar. And I just want to thank everyone again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron, are we still on?